Two Indiana teenagers are dropped off near a hiking trail and expected to meet with a family member in a few hours' time. When the girls do not appear and they cannot be found immediately, they are reported missing. Their bodies are found the next day, along with a photo and an audio recording of the suspected murderer. Their killer has yet to be caught. This is the case of the Delphi Murders. This is the case of Liberty German and Abigail Williams. So today we are talking about the Delphi Murders, which is the case of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. And this case was first brought to my attention a few months ago when the True Crime Garage podcast covered it. They did a really interesting cover on it, and I have been paying attention to this case ever since. It's something that has really stuck with me, and I'm really hoping that, by me covering the case and being able to add in some more recent updates that were not covered in that podcast and in some other, ways that this case has been covered previously, I just hope that we can find who did this and that we can bring closure for the families. It's really devastating what happened, and I honestly can't imagine my own daughter going through that. And it's really heartbreaking, especially watching the interviews of these parents. You can just see how much Abby's mom loved her and how much, she cherished her. And the way that she talked about her was it was so sweet and so amazing. And the same goes for Liberty's grandparents when they talked about her. And just seeing these interviews with these family members, these friends, and hearing them talk about these girls, it was really hard to get through. But this case is so extremely important because it is very recent, and this is a case that I strongly believe can be solved. And I'm hoping that, each and every day we're getting closer to a resolution. So I feel that it's really important to share this case with you guys. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So Liberty German was better known as Libby to her friends and family. She enjoyed making other people feel good, and she loved to bake, and she especially loved baking cookies for her family. She also really enjoyed candy, and she really had a shared love for the outdoors with her best friend, Abby. So Abigail Williams was better known to her friends and family as Abby, and she loved crafts. She loved art and music and volleyball, and her mom said that, she would constantly be doing something crafty, and she liked to knit baby hats and do things with beads and all kinds of stuff. And every now and then she'd switch it and be doing something different. And in addition to doing all of those things, Abby, of course, loved being outdoors with her best friend Libby. Libby was also a aspiring photographer. She had apparently pictures from all over Delphi, and one of the places that they really enjoyed taking these pictures was the Monon High Bridge, and that will bring us into the day of their disappearance. So on February 13th of this year, 2017, the girls were dropped off by a family member near the hiking trail that goes out to the Monon High Bridge. And this is a place that they had been before. This is a place that their families, were familiar with. It was common for teenagers to go to this area, and they just wanted to enjoy their time off from school by going on a little hike, taking pictures, all of that stuff, just hanging out, being best friends. They were expected to meet with another family member later on in the day at a predetermined location, and they were supposed to be picked up by that family member. When that family member arrived, though, the girls were not in sight. That person searched a little bit for them nearby, I assume hoping that, the girls were going to be, just out of sight, that they were close by and, just, a minute's walk away or something. And unfortunately, this person was unable to find them. And so what happens next is that the police are called and the girls are officially reported as missing. So that very night, the police and some volunteers went out into the wooded area here near all the trails, and they worked really hard searching for these girls. A lot of these people stayed very late into the night. Some reports were saying that there were volunteers and police officers out there until 2 in the morning. But the search was officially called off when it had gotten too dark for them to really see anything while they were out there. And at that point, the police did make a statement saying that they did not believe that there was any reason to expect foul play at this point, and they were still hoping to find the girls within the next day or so. So that brings us to February 14th, Valentine's Day of this year. The searches continue that morning, and at this point, they once again have the police officers out there from multiple agencies. They also have a lot of volunteers out there searching for these girls, and they were also able to bring in canine units and dive teams to help with the search. That morning, 2 bodies were found, and they were removed from the woods and taken into the coroner's office. However, at this point, they did not really give any sort of identification of the bodies. They really strongly avoided doing that until they had a little more information. The 2 bodies were found approximately a half-mile from the Monon High Bridge, where the girls were known to have been that day. And around 2 p.m., the police did make a statement. They did not confirm the identities of the bodies at this point, but they did say that they now expected foul play was involved in the girls' disappearance. On the morning of February 15th, first thing in the morning, autopsies were performed on the 2 bodies that had been found near the bridge. And a little bit after the autopsies had, begun, the police did come out and make a statement. They still had not confirmed the identity of the bodies, but they did say that as of now, they had received hundreds of tips already about the case for Liberty and Abby, and in addition to this, they were asking parents to be wary and to, just kind of be aware of where their children are and, just trying to keep them safe. So later on in the day, they had another press conference, and at this point, the Indiana State Police did confirm that the 2 bodies found near the Monon High Bridge were in fact those of Liberty German and Abigail Williams. This was absolutely devastating for friends and family, for all the searchers, everyone in the town. It was a small town, approximately 3,000 people, I believe. Maybe a bit less than that. So it really hit these people very hard to find out that these girls were dead. What hit them harder was the announcement that the police were investigating this as a double homicide, something that is not particularly common in Delphi, Indiana. On this day, they also released a photograph of a man who had been on the same bridge around the time that the girls were. There was no information given about how this photograph was obtained at that time, and essentially at that point, the police said that this man was not a suspect in the case, but it was somebody that they were not able to identify, and they did want to speak with him about the case, hoping that he might have more insight of maybe a timeline during that day of where the girls may have been, or if he had any tips of who else might have been there. So they said that they were just essentially looking for this man to speak to him about that day, and at that point he was not a suspect. However, that changed just a few days later on February 19th when the police officially stated that the man in the photograph they had released was the official suspect in the girls' murder. And on February 22nd, the Indiana State Police also announced that Liberty German had taken video and audio recordings of the suspect on her phone that very day that they disappeared. It was unclear how much of this video and audio they did have, but it does seem that they got the picture that they provided to the public from an enlarged portion of a still from one of these videos, and they also released a very short audio clip that I will insert now. As you can tell, that audio clip is on a loop, just for your purposes because it's so short. It gives you a better chance to take in what's being said. This clip is of a man saying "down the hill." So at this point, I would like to again elaborate on the fact that we do not know exactly how much video and audio was recorded on Libby's phone. I am under the impression that the police have a lot more than what they've given out. The police have been exceptionally careful in this case, and I'll get into that more in a little bit. So at this point, the families, the friends, the town in general, they're devastated over what's happened, and at this point, the police they're using essentially all resources available to them. There are a lot of cases where the police do not, go to the full extent that they can to try to solve a case, and those cases are very unfortunate, but I'm very happy to say that this case seems to be one in which the police have done essentially everything that they possibly can, and they've been very careful with this case, with what information they've released, what information they have, retained for themselves, for, the purposes of executing a proper manhunt for the suspect. And it's very refreshing to know that the police have really, they have gone about this in a very, very decent way. They've also brought in the FBI, who helped set up an official tip line for Abby and Libby's case. And in addition to this, there had already been thousands upon thousands of dollars raised in reward money, and there had been thousands and thousands of tips already received, even within a month of the girls' murders. And in addition to that, it was on March 1st that Abigail's grandparents left a very touching letter at the police station, and I'm going to go ahead and pop that letter up on the screen for you, and I am going to read it out loud for you as well. Where are the police when you need them? I have uttered these words whenever a speeding or reckless driver nearly runs me or someone else off the road. Where are the police when you need them? They are here in Delphi with us. We pray for your protection, and we are forever grateful for your service. Diane and Eric. So at this point in the case, the reward money has reached approximately $200,000, which is a big jump from the initial reward that was offered at $41,000. Multiple donations were received, both big and small. Some donations received came from the Indiana Colts, which I believe is a football team. Excuse me if I'm wrong. I do not know anything about sports. There was also a U.S. Representative's Office. They also donated money to this case to offer up in a reward. So there is a very large reward, over $200,000 at this point, for any information leading to an arrest in this case. And at this point, there have been just so many tips received, and these officers are really just going at every single one of these tips, and they're really digging in deep and trying to do the best job that they can to figure out who committed this crime. One of the things that I found really touching about this case was the Light Up Delphi initiative that the family and some other community members started. And essentially this was an idea where people would put orange light bulbs on their porch lights, and they would leave them on at night, and the idea was that this would signify the memory of Abigail Williams and Liberty German, and it would also signify the fact that their killer had not been caught, that he was still out there, and that we couldn't forget about the case. This was something that is still going on today, and I know that Lowe's, early on in this case, on March 2nd, in fact, they donated 1,000 orange light bulbs to residents of Delphi in order to help, light up Delphi and to keep awareness of the crime that happened, of the fact that these families need justice, in the public's mind. And I thought that was really touching, and it's something that people are still observing today. So there were a couple search warrants that were served early on into this case, and one of those was for Ron Logan's house and property. Now, I want to be absolutely clear. The search warrant was served on March 17th. There was a search done of his house and his property. He owns a lot of property. It's not just like, his backyard. It's a vast amount of property that backs up against the area of these trails. And the girls were found, I can't remember, I don't think it was very specific as to whether they were really found on his property or just right near his property, because, the property lines are a little hazy. But there was a search conducted, and this man was arrested, but it was absolutely nothing to do with the case of, Libby and Abby's murders. He was arrested for a probation violation for a prior conviction for drunk driving. In addition to that, he has appeared to be fully cooperative with law enforcement, and a lot of people very early on were definitely vilifying this man. And, while obviously he's not perfect, nobody's perfect, I have not come across any sort of evidence to suggest that this man is involved. So while I am mentioning him, I do want to be very, very clear that this man does not appear to have been involved in their murders at all. So it wasn't until July 17th that a sketch of the suspect was released, and it is believed that a witness came forward who had seen the man in the picture at some point on that same day, and that he was able to provide a more accurate description of the man to officers. It's a little hazy on exactly why it took so long for a sketch to be released, where the details for this sketch came exactly. There hasn't been a whole lot of information released on that, but there was a sketch given. So throughout this case, there have been well over 25,000 tips given to police, and at this point, there is still a substantial amount of reward money being offered for any information that can be given that helps lead to an arrest in the case. So at this point, this case has brought about a lot of questions for us. Was the suspect local? Was he just passing through? Has this man killed before? Is it likely that he'll kill again? Are people in Delphi safe? Was the murder sexually motivated? There are a lot of questions surrounding this case that we can't answer, and some of that is based off of the fact that a lot of information has been kept from the public by law enforcement. Unfortunately, some of this information is the autopsy reports from Abby and Libby's autopsies. These have been sealed. They were requested to be sealed by prosecuting attorney Robert T. Ives. This was done, I believe, on March 28th. It was asked that these records be sealed, partially because, this would give officers an upper hand when speaking with suspects at any point in the future while working on this case, and it would also help prevent false confessions from being given, it's definitely something that happens and something that I hope to make a video on in the future. But yes, so these records were sealed, so we do not officially know the cause of death. We don't know exactly what state the bodies were in when they were discovered, and, we don't know if there was any sexual assault on either of the girls at any point during their disappearance, or, after their murder before they had been found. So while the sealing of these autopsy records is definitely, unfortunate for armchair detectives like myself who are trying to find as much information as we can about the case, it's actually a very, very smart move. It is definitely something that will help prevent false confessions from happening. So it'll actually give a little more validation to anybody who may come forward, admitting that they had committed this crime, and it definitely will give the police an upper hand while, proceeding with this case, because there's information that they have that if they can catch another person, saying that they have some of this information and it being correct, then they know that this person had to have been involved somehow, because this information is not being released to the public. Another thing that's unclear is whether or not Liberty German's phone was actually retrieved by police. There's been a lot of talk about the fact that the police have not stated whether or not they actually have Libby's phone in their physical possession. While this isn't extremely important in the case, the reason that we talk about it is because basically there was a statement from a family member early on in the case where they had talked about how Libby's phone had been pinging all over town from different cell towers. And so I wanted to address this because this is something that has been a big concern for some people. Basically, your cell phone can connect to multiple towers within an area, and it can switch between these towers like, in an instant. There is software that really goes into which tower your phone decides to ping off of to get a signal from, and there's so many factors that go into that, and your phone can essentially, change which cell tower it's connected to. Like in the middle of a call, it can change between calls, it can be different. So you can be sitting in the same spot all day long making calls, and you can still ping off of multiple cell towers in your area if they're close enough. And Delphi, Indiana is not a big town at all. It's pretty small, and there are a few cell towers within the area. So it is absolutely conceivable that Libby's phone could have been there with her body or somewhere lost in the woods for that entire day, and still could have been pinging off of multiple cell towers without ever having moved from its spot. Now, in addition to this, it has been discussed whether or not Libby's phone pinging off of towers has anything to say as far as maybe the girls were moved, or maybe the killer had taken the phone. And the reason that people speculate on this is because the law enforcement have not actually mentioned if they have her phone. It is speculated that the video and audio recordings could have been obtained from the cloud through, iPhone records and whatnot. And I don't have a whole lot of information exactly on how that specifically would work, but apparently it is a very plausible explanation for how they could have gotten this information without actually physically having Liberty's phone. Now, some people have claimed that the suspect appears to be familiar with the area, and they make these claims based on the image that was provided by law enforcement. Essentially, what people have been saying is that this person is walking on this bridge, which is very high up and has very wide slat spaces. So, if it's your first time on this bridge, people are saying that essentially, you're being very careful because you don't want to step between these slats, and you're very high up, and, most people aren't naturally going to be walking across the bridge for the first time the way that this man was. So in the image that I showed earlier, and I will show again right now, you can see that this man is walking with his head down. He's also walking with his hands in his pocket. He doesn't seem to be worried at all about how high the bridge is or how far apart any of the slats are, and a lot of people have said that this makes it appear that he may be familiar with the area. People have also said that this information could also mean that this man may just be familiar with working with heights. Maybe he's worked on electrical power lines before, and he has to climb up those to work on that kind of stuff. Maybe he's just familiar with heights. So it could be important to the case, but it also could just not mean a lot, unfortunately. It is also widely assumed that there was a sexual motivation for this case, unfortunately, because the autopsy records were sealed back on March 28th. We don't know if there was any sexual assault, involved in this case at all. There could have been, but there also could have not been. We just do not have that information. So, we can operate with the assumption that sexual assault occurred, but it's not really going to make a difference unless a sexual assault leads us to a registered sexual offender. Now, with a very, very brief and quick search, even I was able to find 16 listings of sexual offenders in the Delphi area. In addition to this, I believe that there are actually more than that, that others have come across in different sites with different records. But I am not going to be delving into those individual people because none of them have yet actually been connected with the case in any way. But there was one man who was recently possibly connected with this case, and that is Daniel Nations. So Daniel Nations was arrested after he was reported for having threatened bikers near a hiking trail in Colorado. He was threatening them with a hatchet, and he was also apparently driving around and threatening people in the area in general. In addition to this, there was a man named Timothy Watkins who disappeared from this area while mountain biking. He was found 3 days later on September 17th and he was unfortunately found dead from a gunshot wound. The caliber of this gun also matches a gun that was illegally in the possession of Daniel Nations and his wife when they were stopped by police for a routine traffic stop. So Daniel Nations has quite a long criminal history. He has been convicted for domestic abuse in Indiana, and he is also a registered sex offender for at least 7 separate incidences in multiple states, including Indiana, I believe North Carolina, and Florida. These sexual offenses typically involved him exposing himself to women and sometimes also those women's children. Now, something that really tells us that Nations may be involved in the Delphi murders is that there is court evidence that he was in Indiana during the murders, and that he was only a rather, short drive away from Delphi. There are court records that he was there around that time, and there are also records that he was, in fact, arrested and being held for not reporting his whereabouts as a sexual offender, and he was held between February 24th and 28th in a nearby county to Delphi. And this is important because it really does solidify that, these records prove that he was there in Indiana, not too far away, before the murders happened, and he was definitely there shortly after the murders happened. In addition to this, it seems that Nations very closely resembles the sketch that was provided back in July by law enforcement. So I'm going to, float a few images over the screen at this point, and you can definitely see that some of these images really do portray Daniel Nations to be very, very similar to the sketch of the suspect. And one of the largest features is the wide-set eyes. And if you keep looking at this, the more I look at him and the more I look at the sketch, the more I see it. And it's very telling. That in addition with the fact that, he was threatening other people on another hiking trail in Colorado where he and his wife had very suddenly moved to from Indiana with no real good reason as to why. And this was just a little while after the case had happened. And then, we have court evidence proving that he was in Indiana just before and just after the murders occurred. So on September 28th of this year, Daniel Nations was officially considered a person of interest in the case of Libby and Abby. And officers were sent from Delphi to Colorado within a couple of days of that announcement, and they did interview Nations and they did collect DNA evidence from him. So upon the return of these officers to Delphi, they stated that at this point there was no evidence to specifically include or exclude Nations from their investigation. But it seems that yet again the police may just be being very, very cautious. Some people have unearthed records showing that Robert T. Ives from Delphi County, from Carroll County, sorry, not Delphi County, Delphi is in Carroll County, that he has requested a subpoena ducis tecum, which essentially is requesting information or requesting files or things like that from somebody involved in a case. This request was made on October 5th, and it pertains to charges that would have occurred on February 13th, which was the day of the girls' disappearance and murder. So at this point, some people do believe that it is possible that police are definitely still investigating Nations and that they are hoping to put together evidence against him that would show that he was in Delphi on that day. Now, I am not sharing any specific sources on this piece of information. I will have sources listed for other information in the either the description box or in the comments down below. so that you guys can go see this information for yourself. However, the information about this specific court-ordered subpoena, I'm not sharing information on this because I have seen the screenshots of this information, but at the same time, I was unable to pull this information up through, records and through searching the Indiana records and whatnot. So essentially, I do believe that this is a real potential piece of evidence, but I was not able to find this piece of evidence on my own. So I'm just relaying this information to you guys as far as the fact that this document might be in existence. There is also the chance that maybe it isn't. So just go ahead and keep that in mind. So at this point in time, it has not been announced if a DNA test has officially been done on Nations' DNA compared to maybe any sort of evidence that they might have collected at the crime scene or off of the bodies of Abby and Libby, and there has been no word as to whether or not Nations' DNA matches any possible evidence that the police have in this case. So we are still waiting to hear back on that, but they did mention when they went to interview Nations that they were hoping to run this DNA test as quickly as possible, and they were hoping to fast track it. So unfortunately, we do not have any real forensic evidence at this moment that we know of that connects Nations to the case, but there are multiple things that tell us that he is definitely a likely suspect. It is very possible that Nations had nothing to do with this case, but at the same time, he's clearly a criminal. He's clearly a bad man. He is a sex offender. He has been convicted of domestic abuse, and this man he's not a good person. So I definitely do not have any qualms about mentioning him on this video. So I do just want to state that there is the possibility that he is still not related to this case. So we do need to keep in mind that Abby and Libby's killer has not been officially caught. Daniel Nations is a very good suspect for this case, but we have to keep our minds open and we have to keep looking for who committed this crime. Now, as devastating as this crime is, there have been some good things that have come out of it. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is that upgrades are being made to the hiking trails in Delphi, and this has been done through donations and grants given to Delphi to carry out these improvements. It was less than a month after the girls' murders when a task force was created to look into how they can improve security at these trails. So things that they're going to be adding are, mile markers every 10th of a mile. So if there is an emergency, people can easily find a mile marker and, give an exact location of where they are. They're also going to be putting out security cameras and Wi-Fi access, and they're going to be putting up a lot of lights on these hiking trails. I think that this is amazing. Delphi has they've raised over $176,000 to make these improvements, and I believe it was as of the end of August that they had already been making way on actually, implementing these improvements to the hiking trails. In addition to this, there was a decade-old cold case that was solved thanks to a tip provided in the case for Abby and Libby. This tip said that a man by the name of Kevin Sellers had murdered his uncle a decade earlier, back in 2007. And so I do not have information on to why this tip was related to Abby and Libby's case. It could simply be that a person was like, I know this person and I'm convinced that he killed his uncle a decade ago, and, maybe he could have done this too. So essentially, Kevin Sellers was questioned about his uncle's death and about any connection to the Abby and Libby case. There is no connection to the Delphi murders, but he did admit to having killed his uncle a decade earlier, and he admitted in a statement that he was the sole heir for his uncle's estate. So there was a 10-year-old murder that was solved thanks to tips provided in this case. And while we haven't found Abby and Libby's killer yet, while the family hasn't seen justice yet for what's happened, to these amazing two teenagers, something good did happen. And I think that, we should keep in mind that good things are being done by people in the name of this case. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that. So I thought that was something that was really quite amazing. So in addition to this, there is a sports stadium. I think it's built or close to being finished, but it's going to have softball fields, it's going to have a playground, all this stuff, and it's being built in Delphi in honor of Abby and Libby. And there has been so much money raised to make this happen, and it's something that the families have been working very, very hard on. And I think that it's a really great thing, and it's going to bring a lot of happiness to a lot of people in Delphi. And it definitely signifies the girls' loves for sports and the outdoors, and being outside and getting things done. And I think it's really, really touching. And it's definitely something that I think is really good for the family to have that, and to know that their daughters are always going to be remembered. So that is the case of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. That is the Delphi murders, and this case is just really important to me. I have been following it since I heard the True Crime Garage podcast about it. I really do honestly think, like I said earlier, that this case can be solved, and it can be solved soon. And I feel that if we keep this case in the public's mind, and we keep talking about it, and we keep looking for who could have done this, I really do think that we can find the person who did this, whether that person be Daniel Nations or whether it be somebody else. So that's why I wanted to bring this case to you today, because it's something that I've been watching closely, and it's a case that's very important to me personally, just because I heard about this case, and I fell in love with these girls. I fell in love with how sweet they were, and how much their friends and family obviously loved them, and I'm getting all emotional about it now. But it's hard to imagine as a parent something like that happening to my own daughter, and I want so desperately for somebody to be able to provide these families with the justice that they deserve for what happened to these girls, these very sweet, amazing girls. So please keep this case in your mind. Please spread the word about it. Share this video, share other people's videos, share podcasts about it, whatever it is, share it with people. Get these girls this case out there. Help us find who did this, so that their families get the justice that they deserve. Thank you so much for watching today, guys, and I will see you again next week for another case. Bye, everyone.